He is a quiet, withdrawn boy who is considered problematic by most. He lives with his grandmother, in a poor neighborhood, and faces hidden discrimination at school every day. He's not taken seriously, especially by his math teacher, Miss Maxwell, who abuses her power and makes fun of him in front of the class. But everything changes when she decides to publicly humiliate the boy by writing a complicated equation on the board. She adds with a smile, "Go ahead, Thompson. Show me what you've got." Thompson Moore was never the kind of boy who called out for attention. At 13 years old, he carried himself in quiet reserve, a withdrawn figure whose soft-spoken nature and unassuming look often led others to label him problematic. In the cramped, worn-down apartment he shared with his beloved grandmother in a struggling inner-city neighborhood, Thompson learned early that the world rarely offered second chances. Every day, as he trudged along cracked sidewalks and past battered storefronts, he kept his head down, clutching his faded backpack as both a shield and a reminder of the modest life he led. Westside Middle School, where Thompson was enrolled, was a building steeped in the wear of decades, its walls scarred by gossip and neglect as much as by the chalk dust of its classrooms. Behind the heavy oak doors of his classroom, Thompson's presence was minimized by the weight of unspoken judgments. The other students, preoccupied with their own struggles and small triumphs, rarely bothered to see past the whispers that labeled him different. Teachers, too, were quick to file him away as a troublemaker whose silence was not a gift but a symptom of a deeper defect. It was in this stifling atmosphere that one name rose above the rest as emblematic of the injustice weighing on Thompson's fragile spirit: Ms. Maxwell. Ms. Maxwell was the mathematics teacher, an imposing figure whose icy demeanor and harsh tongue were known by every student in that class. With her sharply tailored skirts and a tone that brooked no dissent, she wielded her authority like a finely honed scalpel. In her eyes, some students had natural brilliance, while others, like Thompson, were little more than burdens to be managed. Every day, as she paced before the chalkboard, she surveyed her students with a condescending smirk, particularly fixating on the quiet boy who sat in the back, shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. The rumors about him, the quiet mockery whispered in the hallways, all culminated in the teacher's implicit conviction that he belonged to the problem category, a label that had narrowed his opportunities long before he had a chance to prove himself. It was on a particularly gray morning, when the corridors of Westside Middle School felt colder than usual, that Ms. Maxwell prepared what would become the day's public spectacle. The classroom, already heavy with anticipation and unspoken disdain, transformed into a stage for humiliation. At the front of the class, the large chalkboard bore an equation so intricate and intimidating that even the skeletal outlines of advanced mathematics seemed to leap from the slate. Ms. Maxwell's voice rang out with a cutting clarity as she announced to the class, "This problem is taken straight from a Stanford course, one that even 11th graders wouldn't be able to solve. Come on, Thompson, show us what you're capable of." A heavy silence fell over the room, a silence not of learning, but of anticipation as every student waited for the inevitable spectacle of failure. Thompson's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a mix of dread and defiance. Deep inside, the young boy felt the burn of injustice that had been stitched into his daily life. The silent discrimination of teachers who dismissed his potential, the casual cruelty of classmates who never bothered to understand, the systemic neglect that so often manifested in contemptuous words and empty expectations. Yet today, as the teacher's smirking challenge echoed in his ears, something stirred within him. In that charged moment, as Ms. Maxwell's eyes shone with the cruel expectation of victory over another instance of public embarrassment, Thompson rose slowly from his seat. The classroom, which had been waiting for him to stumble and fail, now held its breath as he squared his shoulders. There was no playful glimmer, no rehearsed joke prepared to entertain the mocking gazes of his peers. Instead, his eyes betrayed a steely resolve, a spark of indignation that had long been smothered by quiet submission. For a few seconds, time seemed to suspend. Then, in a clear, resonant voice that cut through the din of whispered predictions, Thompson declared, "This is a problem from the Stanford course, Ms. Maxwell. You yourself can't solve it. But I can, if you'll stop playing God for just 5 minutes." His unexpected words rippled through the classroom. What began as an assignment meant to humiliate transformed into a moment of confrontation. A single act of defiance that would forever alter the way his classmates, his teachers, and even himself looked at him. In that instance, the oppressive atmosphere shifted. The smirks froze, the anticipatory laughter stalled, and even Ms. Maxwell's confident gaze faltered. Thompson's declaration, bold and breathtaking in its simplicity, was more than just an answer to a difficult equation. It was a demand for dignity, a call to expose a system that had too long derived power from belittling those it deemed unworthy. In the oppressive echo of that challenge, every silent observer felt the stirrings of something new. The possibility that genius could rise from the forgotten, that merit might yet be recognized amid the chains of prejudice and neglect. And as the classroom held its breath, Thompson More began to reclaim the one thing that had been stolen from him, his voice. The room remained frozen in that split second after Thompson's defiant words. The air in the classroom, heavy with barely restrained anticipation and the sound of every beating heart, was punctured only by a loud, dismissive laugh from Ms. Maxwell. Her expression shifted from smug satisfaction to barely concealed irritation. "Really, Thompson?" she sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. "You think that was some sort of grand act? A trick to dazzle us with your so-called genius?" Her tone was synchronized with the sharp scratch of chalk against the board as she moved smoothly to erase part of the equation she had written earlier. With a sweeping gesture that emphasized her superiority, she began to rewrite the problem on a fresh section of the blackboard, each stroke a symbolic rebuke to the boy who had dared challenge her classroom's order. The classroom, already in a state of stunned silence, now filled with murmurs and exchanged glances. Some students appeared to be unsure, hesitant looks darting towards one another, while others wore expressions of anticipation, as if keen to witness how she would dismantle his unexpected claim. Ms. Maxwell's eyes burned with a calculated fire as she continued. "Since you claim you can solve a problem that even seniors from a prestigious course would struggle with, then perhaps you should demonstrate your so-called genius right here, right now." She paused dramatically, turning to face him squarely, her smirk arcing over her lips. "Let this be a test not only of your math skills but also of your resolve. Solve this equation," she declared sharply. "And if you can truly do so, perhaps you might convince us that you aren't just another problem child, but a real mind in need of recognition." Thompson felt his chest tighten at her words, but rather than shrinking away, he took a deep, steadying breath. His mind raced, not just with the mechanics of the equation that sprawled across the blackboard in unwieldy symbols and intimidating exponents, but with the sheer audacity of being put in the spotlight for his potential and for his challenges. For years, he had borne the weight of a society and a system that had preemptively labeled him as unworthy merely because of where he came from and the quiet nature of his existence. Now, with every eye fixed upon him, he was given an opportunity, a chance, however painful or paradoxically exhilarating, to prove something not just to Ms. Maxwell, but to every sneering voice that had ever told him he was less than. As she stepped back, the room filled with a taut silence. Ms. Maxwell's cutting look lingered as she crossed her arms and waited expectantly for Thompson to speak. The air was electric with the collective tension of anticipation. In those moments, time seemed to crawl, each second laden with the weight of history, of broken promises in neglected classrooms and of those who had fought silently against the tide of prejudice. Thompson's eyes scanned the room, noting the resigned expressions of classmates who had long stopped expecting miracles, and then slowly settled back on the formidable chalkboard. The equation before him was formidable, a complex arrangement of algebraic symbols and advanced concepts that stretched far beyond the comfortable boundaries of Westside Middle School's curriculum. In that moment, as the hushed whispers of ridicule and pity competed with the distant, almost imperceptible heartbeat of defiance, Thompson's inner voice grew louder. "I can solve this," he thought, not just in terms of arithmetic, but as a bold declaration of his own potential. His voice, which had always been soft and measured in the face of derision, now carried an unexpected strength as it filled the quiet room. "Ms. Maxwell," he began, his tone steady and deliberate, "I accept your challenge." There was a pause as his words rippled through the assembled students, a pause so profound that even the ticking of the classroom clock seemed impressed by the gravity of his statement. You claim this equation is beyond the grasp of those who are truly capable, but maybe that is because you have never allowed someone like me, someone who has been dismissed for too long, a chance to show what real ability looks like. A murmur of disbelief passed through the class, punctuated by a few hesitant nods from peers who, behind their fear or resignation, sensed something monumental stirring in that moment. Ms. Maxwell's eyes narrowed, an expression that momentarily betrayed her uncertainty. Was she really witnessing an act of raw, untamed intellect, or simply another desperate attempt at attention? For her, it was obvious. If the boy could solve the problem, it would expose not only his hidden talents but also the hypocrisy of a system that thrived on demeaning him at every turn. The silent challenge hung in the air as Thompson stepped forward towards the chalkboard. With deliberate, measured movements, he grabbed a piece of chalk. His hand shook slightly, not from fear alone but from the enormity of standing up against years of marginalization and the weight of unjust assumptions. Every eye in the room was now locked on him. Some faces were lined with skepticism, others with support, and many with a quiet hope that perhaps this could be the turning point the class so desperately needed. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, a shared understanding that, for the first time in his life, Thompson was not going to be the silent bystander in his own story. As he began to work through the equation, his voice resonated clearly as he explained each step of his reasoning. Each careful manipulation of mathematical symbols was a quiet protest against the daily devaluations he had endured. Slowly but surely, the numbers began to reveal their secrets under his determined hand. With every calculated move, he recited the logic of his work, challenging the room not only with abstract variables but with a profound statement that genius can emerge from the shadows if only given a chance. In that charged moment, Ms. Maxwell watched with a mixture of indignation and disbelief. Her earlier sneers now faded into a strained silence, and even the bellwether of authority in the room seemed to waver beneath the brilliance that emanated from the unassuming teenager. The classroom, once a canvas for her daily mockery, now bore witness to the quiet triumph of a boy who refused to be defined by the neglect and discrimination of a flawed system. The classroom was utterly silent as Thompson stepped up to the blackboard. The air was thick with tension and anticipation, each heartbeat in the room punctuating the gravity of this moment. Before him sprawled the complex equation Ms. Maxwell had scrawled, a web of algebraic symbols, exponents, and terms that, at first glance, seemed intended solely to humiliate him. For years, Thompson had been cast aside as the problem child, his quiet demeanor conflated with a lack of ability, his potential assumed to be as broken as the neglected, crumbling halls of Westside Middle School. But now, with a trembling yet resolute hand, he reached for a piece of chalk, determined to reclaim not only his dignity but the respect that had long been denied him. Eyes fixed on the symbols and logic that danced before him, Thompson began working methodically. Each stroke of chalk on the board was deliberate, each step in his reasoning clear and calculated. The equation, drawn from a Stanford course as Ms. Maxwell had claimed, was designed to be unsolvable, or so the teacher presumed. Yet as Thompson's mind raced through formulas, the structure of the problem unfolded before him like a secret language that he had mastered in the quiet hours late at night, poring over textbooks in the musty glow of a battered desk lamp. His voice, usually so soft and rarely heard above a whisper, now projected in calm, measured tones. First, if we isolate the variable here. He paused only briefly to ensure that his logic was sound. With each step, he not only manipulated numbers and variables but also dismantled the preconceptions that had been forced upon him. As the minutes stretched on, every student in the room found their attention riveted by the determined pace of Thompson's work. The chalkboard began to transform under his skillful hand. Complicated expressions simplified, terms canceled gracefully, leading finally to a clear, concise solution. A hush fell over the class once more when he drew his final line. The answer, irrefutable and elegant, shone back at them like a beacon. For a split second, time seemed to pause. The classmates who had, until now, expected humiliation were forced to confront a quiet miracle of intellect. Even those who had snickered earlier felt their eyes widen in astonishment. There was no mocking laughter, only a weighty silence, filled with the realization that something momentous had just happened. Then, as if propelled by the desire to shatter the veneer of complacency that had long masked deeper injustices in their school, Thompson stepped away from the board. The room remained nearly motionless, the only sound the faint rustle of shifting papers and incredulous gasps. With the confidence of someone done being underestimated, he broke that silence. "This isn't just about solving an equation," he began, his voice growing stronger with every word. "It's about finally speaking the truth. This problem isn't just a math exercise. It's proof that every challenge we face can be overcome despite the obstacles deliberately placed in our way." His eyes swept across the room as he continued, daring everyone to listen. "You see, this equation comes from a Stanford course, something designed for the best minds out there. And yet, here I am solving it while you all expect me to fail because I come from a poor neighborhood and because you assume I'm not good enough. But it goes deeper than just math. I know about the rigged grading system, the way teachers choose to undervalue students like me, and how our backgrounds are used against us to strip away our self-worth." A murmur began to ripple through his classmates. Shock, disbelief, and reluctant admiration contended in their eyes. Thompson's words were more than a defense of his own abilities. They were an indictment of a system that had long preyed on the vulnerable. "You sit there," he said directly, turning his gaze to Ms. Maxwell, who now stood frozen at the front, her features contorted in a mix of indignation and disbelief. "And you seem to think that by writing impossible problems and mocking those who struggle, you are proving your authority. But your real challenge isn't in these numbers. It's in the hypocrisy of a system that deliberately hides the truth from us. It's a system that artificially inflates the grades of those who fit a particular mold while crushing the spirit of those who dare to be different." His voice grew louder, resonating with the pent-up frustration and long-held pain of years of quiet injustices. "I have seen the secret meetings where teachers discuss which grades to adjust based on a student's background. I've heard whispers about how children from financially challenged families are marked down. Not because they can't do the work, but because we simply aren't valued enough to deserve a fair chance. Every day, I've been pushed aside. Every day I've been reminded that my worth is measured by prejudices I did nothing to earn. Today, I'm not just solving a math problem. Today, I'm reclaiming my voice. I'm saying that our intelligence isn't determined by the color of our clothes or the size of our bank account. We, too, have dreams, talents, and a determination that no amount of discrimination can ever break." The room was awash in stunned silence. Some students, previously resigned to a lifetime of quiet despair, now exchanged looks of wonder and whispered hope. A few of the quieter kids began nodding slowly, as if understanding for the first time that they too had a right to assert their worth. Even as tears welled in a couple of their eyes, there was a palpable sense of solidarity emerging from the wreckage of past demeaning lessons. Thompson's words had transformed the atmosphere in a single, breathtaking moment. What had begun as a routine math challenge had erupted into a clarion call for dignity and fairness. A rallying cry aimed at the heart of every person who had ever been dismissed by a system designed to keep them silent. His carefully solved equation was no longer just a mathematical exercise. It was an act of defiance, a testament to the hidden genius that societal neglect could never extinguish. As the final echoes of his passionate outburst faded, the silence that settled over the classroom was thick with both reverence and uncertainty. For in that moment, Thompson More had not only solved an unsolvable problem, he had also unraveled the pretense of a system that had long taken pleasure in belittling him, and in doing so, he had lit a spark that could not be put out. In the wake of his resolute outburst and the elegant solution etched upon the chalkboard, Thompson More did not simply retreat to silence. Instead, he stepped forward once more, emboldened by the electric shock of his own declaration. The room, stilled by the revelation of his raw intellect, seemed to pulse as if in anticipation. His voice, steady but imbued with the tremors of years spent in suppression, rang out as he continued. "You all saw what I've just done, but there is more that needs telling." A hush fell over the room. Thompson's eyes, once timid and downcast, now shone with a light that was dangerous in its honesty. He gestured to the very walls of the classroom, as if they, too, held secrets. This school, he said, is not just a building where we learn algebra and geometry. It is a system, one that is rigged from the start to keep students like me down, and to favor those whose home lives and bank accounts are deemed worthy of success. I have seen how grades are not given fairly. I have overheard teachers conferring in hushed tones about which students should receive that extra bump, and which should not. His words fell like stones into a still pond. Faces that had previously been masked in indifference or taunted amusement now turned somber, curious, and even pained. Thompson's voice grew firmer as he recalled the crooked practices he had witnessed. There are secret meetings where teachers adjust scores on the same exam. Adjust scores based not on your performance, but on the neighborhood you come from, or whether your parents can donate to the school fund. I have heard whispers of a grading committee deciding that children from low-income families get a harder standard to pass. And I have seen, hidden behind the locked office door, documents that show selective grade adjustments. A murmur began to ripple through the classroom, a mix of shock and disbelief. The very foundations of Westside Middle School, a place where the disadvantaged were already struggled to be heard, were being called into question. Thompson, breaking through the bounds of a math problem, had become the unlikely herald of truth. His words, though delivered in the soft cadence of a boy on the verge of adolescence, were weighted with the burden of an entire generation's silent suffering. He continued, his voice rising, "You see, Ms. Maxwell, you claimed that advanced equations are meant to test our limits. But the real test is not one you put on the board. It's the test of whether this system will ever treat every student with fairness. Every day I see the way teachers, according to who they think you are, decide how much credit you deserve, even before you've turned in an assignment. My classmates, many of them bright and hardworking, have been held back by biases both overt and covert. And I stand here, not just as a student who solved your equation, but as someone who dares to say that the standards you enforce are stacked against us." For a long moment, time seemed to slow. The classroom, previously an arena for academic competition and petty rivalries, transformed into a forum for a much deeper dispute. Even the walls seemed to lean in, as if they too wished to bear witness to this moment of truth. Some students exchanged anxious glances. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, caught between the weight of truth and the fear of reprisal. Thompson's tone softened slightly, yet the determination remained unyielding. "I may be 13, he said, "but I have learned that greatness is not born in comfortable hours. It is forged in the fires of hardship, and you have been trying to smother that flame." His eyes, wide and unwavering, scanned the room. "How many of you have had your potential ignored because you come from a place that is judged by where you live rather than what you do? How many of you have been told, in subtle ways or harsh tones, that you are not meant to succeed?" A heavy silence followed his questions. In that silence, even Ms. Maxwell's confident facade trembled. For the first time, her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty as she listened to the litany of injustices he laid before everyone. Thompson's words were not just an attack. They were a call to remembrance, a reminder of all the whispered disappointments and all the overlooked talents in that very classroom. Drawing a deep breath, Thompson pressed on. "I am not here to undermine every lesson or to cast blame on every teacher. But the truth is, our grades, our opportunities, and our futures are being manipulated by a system that believes money and status determine intelligence. I have seen teachers quietly marking down students after speaking with administrators whose decision is final. The decision that some of our work is less worthy simply because we don't fit your ideal image of success." By now, a few classmates had started to murmur appreciatively, their eyes alight with a mix of hope and indignation. Even those who had once ridiculed him were now forced to confront their own complicity in a system that had long taught them to accept injustice as normal. "I say this not out of spite," Thompson pleaded, "but out of necessity. For too long, I have been the problem kid, a label attached to me before anyone even knew my potential. And for too long, teachers and administrators have hidden behind their authority, choosing to lift up a few while casting others down. Today I challenge that. Today, I am not just solving an equation. I am speaking the truth about a broken system. The classroom, now a microcosm of every student who had ever felt the sting of discrimination, seemed to pulse with shared energy. Even a few of the teachers seated in the back shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes downcast. The reality that Thompson exposed was too glaring to ignore, a system designed to reward privilege and punish hope. As the final punctuation of his statement echoed in the quiet room, Thompson glanced meaningfully at Ms. Maxwell, who had become the prime emblem of the system's cruelty. Her lips had parted in shock, her eyes reflecting a moment's fear of exposure. In that encounter, the power dynamics of the classroom had been irrevocably altered. Thompson had not only proven his intellectual worth, he had opened a window into the deep-seated discrimination that had marred his education. In that charged moment, something shifted imperceptibly in the air. The murmurs gave way to a subdued applause, a tentative, cautious clapping that spoke of recognition, validation, and the deep desire for change. For every student in that room, Thompson's fearless proclamation was a spark that could ignite a revolution of empathy and fairness. The equation on the board was solved, and with it, the cipher to a system of silent oppression was laid bare for all to see. In the days that followed Thompson's electrifying declaration, the halls of Westside Middle School buzzed with an energy that had long lain dormant. Word of his impassioned revelation quickly spread beyond the confines of his classroom. What began as a lone act of defiance in a single lesson, exposing rigged grading and institutional bias, erupted into a full-blown scandal that threatened to shake the very foundations of the school. At first, the reaction was subtle. A series of furtive glances exchanged in the hallways, hushed conversations among teachers, and a noticeable change in the demeanor of the students. Some whispered in admiration, others in disbelief. Thompson's peers, many of whom had resigned themselves to a lifetime of being marginalized, found themselves awakened to the possibility that the system which had long betrayed them might be challenged from within. His calculated steps at the board had not only solved a difficult equation, but had also unmasked the hidden injustices that had been quietly sown throughout the school's policies. It wasn't long, however, before the administration took notice. In an emergency meeting convened in the cramped conference room of the school's principal, a collection of stern-faced administrators and veteran teachers gathered in a frenzied attempt to control the damage. Records were summoned, and spreadsheets, replete with dubious grading patterns and murmurs of bias, were hurriedly pored over behind closed doors. The principal, a man known for his unwavering commitment to order, now appeared visibly perturbed. It was evident that Thompson's impassioned denunciation had thrown the school's long-established procedures into disarray, and worse, it threatened to reveal years of covert practices that favored the elite over the deserving. Rumors began circulating that Ms. Maxwell, whose name had grown synonymous with relentless derision of problem students, might soon face disciplinary action. Senior figures within the district whispered about possible internal investigations and the potential appointment of an independent auditor to examine how grades were manipulated at Westside. The whispers grew louder as the school administration issued a terse statement urging calm and discretion and promising that appropriate measures were being taken to ensure all student assessments were conducted fairly. However, these official assurances only served to stoke suspicions among parents, teachers, and community members alike. Yet the administration's attempts to mop up the scandal encountered an unforeseen adversary, a smartphone video clip. Unbeknownst to the school's authorities, one of Thompson's classmates had recorded the pivotal moment during his fearless confrontation, the precise instant when his voice had broken the oppressive silence of the classroom. The video, raw and unscripted, captured Thompson's steady progression from deftly solving the daunting equation to his impassioned revelation of systemic injustice. Within hours, the clip found its way onto social media platforms. It spread like wildfire across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, shattering any semblance of hush that the administration had hoped to maintain. The digital storm was relentless. In countless posts and online comment threads, viewers expressed not only shock at the blatant discrimination but also solidarity with the brave 13-year-old who had dared to challenge an entrenched system. For many, the video was a powerful symbol, a beacon that illuminated the silent suffering of students from low-income backgrounds and the systemic favoritism that had long plagued the education system. It wasn't merely a story of one boy and one teacher. It was the voice of a generation that had grown tired of being written off before they had a chance to shine. Local news outlets quickly picked up the story. Journalists arrived at Westside Middle School and interviewed shocked teachers, concerned parents, and even students who hesitated between fear and hope. A series of exposés detailed not only Thompson's courageous stand but also revealed a pattern of preferential treatment in grading that disproportionately affected children from marginalized communities. As these revelations aired on evening news broadcasts and were discussed on radio talk shows, the pressure on school officials mounted. Community leaders, educational activists, and even alumni began demanding accountability. Parent-teacher association meetings turned impassioned, with many vocally condemning the covert practices that had undermined the core mission of education. Amid this uproar, the school's governing board was compelled to act. An independent review was swiftly commissioned to investigate the allegations of biased grading and discriminatory practices. Ms. Maxwell, once seen as a pillar of strict academic discipline, found herself at the epicenter of a growing controversy. Accusations against her were carefully documented by the investigative team, and in time, mounting evidence led to her suspension pending a full inquiry. The board's decisive action, though long overdue in the eyes of many, did little to quiet the public outcry. Instead, it fueled further debates about whether punitive measures were enough, or whether systemic reform was desperately needed. As the video circulated far beyond the school walls, Thompson's personal life changed gradually. Unable to ignore the unprecedented support streaming in from social media, he found solace in the recognition that his words had resonated with countless others. His story traveled on local news broadcasts and was soon shared in community forums, where individuals recounted their own experiences of being marginalized by a system that had long triumphed through silence. Encouraged by the outpouring, local nonprofits and educational reform groups began organizing rallies and town hall meetings to discuss how to bring about meaningful change to ensure that every student, regardless of background, was given a fair chance. Although the scandal had torn open deep wounds, it also sparked an unprecedented dialogue on educational equity. Over the coming weeks, spirited debates unfolded on television panels, in op-ed pieces, and in classrooms across the district. The narrative was no longer solely about one teacher's misconduct. It was about the insidious mechanisms of injustice that had been allowed to persist unchecked. Thompson became an accidental icon, his quiet genius and unyielding integrity celebrated in stories and interviews that promised a new era of accountability in education. In that unfolding drama, it became clear that the system which had once thrived on the suppression of truth was now being forced to reckon with its own failures, thanks in no small part to a boy who refused to be silenced. His journey, catalyzed by a single moment of defiant clarity and amplified to the masses by digital media, had opened a window onto a past riddled with discrimination. The echoes of injustice were now being echoed back at the very institutions that had perpetuated it. In the wake of the televised uproar, Westside Middle School found itself thrust into the unforgiving glare of public scrutiny. The scandal was no longer confined to hushed whispers in the hallways or fleeting social media posts. It had grown into a full-blown investigation, spearheaded by outraged parents, impassioned community activists, and relentless media outlets determined to expose every hidden injustice within the institution. Within days, the school board announced the formation of an independent review committee. This panel, comprising educational experts, civil rights advocates, and community representatives, was given the formidable task of scrutinizing every facet of the grading system and disciplinary practices at Westside Middle School. The committee's mandate was clear: uncover and dismantle any policies or practices that perpetuated discrimination against students from impoverished backgrounds and other marginalized groups. Meetings were convened in cramped conference rooms, where teachers and administrators found themselves stacked with evidence that began to reveal a disturbing pattern. Testimonies from current and former staff members emerged, some whispering about secret meetings to adjust scores, others describing how behavioral reports were manipulated based on a student's economic status. For many, the investigation was a long overdue reckoning with a system that had too often rewarded conformity and status instead of genuine academic achievement. At the heart of the controversy was Ms. Maxwell, whose reputation as a strict, albeit callous, mediator of academic standards had been irrevocably tarnished. The independent committee meticulously compiled records, emails, and internal memos that pointed to selective grading practices. Rumors that teachers had been under subtle pressure to penalize those from impoverished families, while boosting the marks of students from more affluent backgrounds, were gradually substantiated by undeniable evidence. The documents painted a portrait of a system engineered to prioritize privilege over promise. Across town, an outpouring of support for Thompson surged. Parents who had once sat silently at PTA meetings now led fervent rallies demanding transparency and accountability. Community activists and local nonprofit groups, long engaged in grassroots educational reform, organized town hall meetings and public forums. In these gatherings, using Thompson's viral video as a catalyst, families recounted personal experiences of systemic bias, of moments when a teacher's judgment or a school policy had unfairly stifled their children's potential. The passionate voices of these citizens resonated through community centers and local media alike, forcing the district to confront the consequences of decades of unchecked discrimination. Local news channels ran continuous segments on the unfolding scandal. Journalists uncovered that the videotaped moment of Thompson's stand had been viewed by tens of thousands within hours, sparking a national dialogue about educational equity. Op-eds and investigative reports began to proliferate. Influential newspapers challenged school districts across the region to reevaluate their practices. The narrative evolved quickly, from a single classroom confrontation to a powerful indictment of an entire system that valued appearances over integrity. Within the school itself, the atmosphere grew palpably tense. Teachers who had once enforced opaque policies were now under the microscope, their every action questioned by inspectors and concerned parents. A number of faculty members, previously considered untouchable in their authority, found themselves summoned to speak before the committee. While some attempted to defend their methods as necessary for maintaining standards, many were forced to acknowledge the inherent inequities that had become endemic in the grading process. Even as the investigation proceeded, Thompson's newfound reputation as a beacon of honesty and resilience began to take shape. His own quiet determination had sparked conversations not only about fair grading but also about the broader mission of educating every child with dignity. Mentors and community leaders commended him for his courage, and local media interviewed him repeatedly, each appearance reinforcing the image of a young student who had turned personal adversity into a call for systemic change. In the midst of the upheaval, school administrators scrambled to salvage the institution's reputation. Emergency meetings were held to consider overhaul measures, revised grading protocols, transparent performance evaluations, and mandated sensitivity training for all staff members. Yet even as promises were made, the collective distrust of the community seemed impossible to erase. Parents demanded not just words of regret but substantive policy changes that would guarantee fairness for every student, irrespective of their social or economic background. The district's superintendent, under mounting pressure, issued a public statement acknowledging that certain practices have indeed compromised the integrity of our educational system, and vowed to institute immediate reforms. However, for many, these announcements felt too little, too late. The scars of systemic injustice were deep, nurtured by years of subtle devaluation and overt prejudice. In community forums that followed, impassioned speakers recalled family members who had been failed by the very institutions entrusted with their education, a sobering reminder that change had always been long in coming. As relentless media coverage and community activism forced the school board's hand, a significant breakthrough was soon announced. Ms. Maxwell was suspended pending the investigation's final report. While the decision confirmed what many in the community had long suspected, it also galvanized further stirring. Activists hailed the move as the first step toward dismantling an oppressive paradigm, and local news anchors declared that Westside Middle School might serve as a model for nationwide reform if comprehensive changes were sustained. In the midst of this transformative storm, Thompson continued to navigate his daily life with an inner resolve that belied his age. His quiet genius had erupted into a clarion call for justice, and his story ignited waves of hope among those who had once felt invisible. Despite the uncertainty swirling around the school and the potential repercussions of voicing truths that many found uncomfortable, Thompson remained an unwavering symbol of integrity, a young mind that refused to be measured by biased standards. In the aftermath of the monumental inquiry and community uprising, Westside Middle School was unrecognizable, a battleground where a long-suppressed truth had finally been unearthed. The administration's decision to suspend Ms. Maxwell and launch a thorough systemic review had sent shockwaves through the entire district. Parents, teachers, and community leaders had united in their demand for accountability and fairness. And at the heart of it all stood Thompson Moore, a 13-year-old boy who had risked everything by speaking out against a system designed to crush the dreams of students like him. In the weeks that followed, Thompson's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. Invitations poured in from local educational activists, reform-minded administrators, and even representatives of prestigious institutions, all eager to hear more from the young hero who had exposed a rigged system. The viral video of his impassioned speech in that ordinary classroom had transformed him into a reluctant symbol of resistance, a beacon for those who had long been marginalized and overlooked. The true impact was felt in the corridors of power, where policy discussions and head meetings had taken a hard look at the inequities that had plagued the school for far too long. Among the most significant developments was an invitation for Thompson to speak at a statewide educational forum titled Reimagining Equity in Our Classrooms. Held in a sprawling convention center in the heart of the city, the forum was attended by educators, policymakers, journalists, and activists from across the state. It had become a platform for those who believed that honesty and accountability must prevail in the realm of education. For Thompson, whose days had been previously spent lurking in the shadows of neglect and discrimination, this opportunity was nothing short of surreal. Laden with layers of trepidation and exhilaration, he prepared to step onto a stage not as the quiet, problem boy everyone had pinned him as, but as a spokesperson for justice. The auditorium was filled with expectant faces and the murmur of hushed conversations. Large banners hung from the ceiling with inspiring slogans such as "Voice of the Voiceless" and "Every student deserves a stage." Backstage, Thompson stood quietly, his heart pounding in his chest like a rallying drum of defiance. He glanced at the framed photograph of his mother, a cherished relic that accompanied him through years of hardship, reminding him that his silence in the past was not a mark of weakness, but a wound he was now ready to heal. His grandmother's gentle, proud smile in a faded snapshot gave him the strength to believe that his journey was part of something far greater than himself. When the moderator introduced him, a respectful silence fell over the audience. Thompson walked to the center of the stage, his posture both humble and determined. In that moment, as bright stage lights shone down on him, every eye in the room was fixed on the young man who had dared to defy a broken system. Taking a deep breath, he began his speech in a clear, deliberate voice. "Today," he said, "I stand before you not only as a student who solved a difficult equation, but as someone who has witnessed the pain of discrimination, the pain of being told I was not good enough because of where I come from." His eyes swept across the crowd, making contact with individuals who had themselves been hurt by an education system that valued conformity over compassion. "I was assigned a problem designed not to test my abilities but to humiliate me. And when I solved it, I realized that the real challenge is not an equation on a board. It is the entrenched system that allows injustice to hide behind policies and secret meetings." A ripple of murmurs went through the room as he continued, his voice growing with conviction. "I have seen how hidden biases, unfair grading practices, and the subtle manipulation of our futures have been tolerated for too long. I have been labeled as a problem child in a system that prioritizes privilege over potential. But I refuse to be defined by these limitations. I believe that every one of us deserves the right to prove our abilities, to shine regardless of our background. Our intelligence and creativity are not measured by the color of our neighborhoods or the size of our bank accounts, but by our determination to rise." Every word he spoke resonated with the depth of his experiences, encapsulating the anger, the strife, and ultimately the hope that had inspired his rebellion. Thompson paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the audience like a gentle thunder. "I want to thank all of you for standing with me," he said, his voice softening. "Not just for me, but for every student who has been ignored or undervalued. Today, our voices join together, demanding change. Our struggles and our pain have taught us lessons more profound than any textbook can. And while some may have tried to break us, they only gave us a stage to show the true measure of our resilience. As he neared the end of his speech, a hush had fallen over the entire auditorium. A collective, respectful silence that spoke of hope and the audacity of change. I stand before you now, not as a victim, but as a testament to the strength forged in the fire of adversity. Let this be a turning point, a promise that we will no longer allow injustice to persist in our schools. Let our intelligence, our creativity, and our passion serve as the foundation for a new future, one where every student is seen, heard, and celebrated. With those final words, Thompson's voice rang out clear and unwavering. The audience erupted into applause, a heartfelt, thunderous ovation that carried the sound of triumph and possibility. In that moment, when the clamor of clapping hands mingled with tears of joy and relief, a profound shift had taken place. The very modalities of power were trembling under the weight of authentic expression, and old hierarchies were being questioned by the unbreakable spirit of a determined youth. Outside the forum, news outlets recounted the saga of Thompson More, the quiet boy who transformed his pain into a clarion call for fairness. Ms. Maxwell had been permanently removed from her position, and investigations into systemic discrimination in grading throughout the district were now underway. Thompson's speech had ignited a movement, inspiring educational reform and galvanizing marginalized voices across the state. In the months that followed, Thompson received support from academic institutions that recognized his brilliance and resilience. He was offered a chance to attend an advanced program at a prestigious academy, and local community centers honored him with awards celebrating his courage. Thompson's journey, from the shadows of a stigmatized existence to becoming a symbol of hope and change, had shown that true genius is not predetermined by one's circumstances but nurtured through perseverance, pain, and the relentless quest for justice. She wanted to break him, but she gave him a stage, and what he showed was not taught by textbooks, but by pain and patience. Subscribe if you believe that genius can be born in any class.